How did I turn this into this? Stick around to find out on this episode of Jumpstart Hobbies. First we have this Viking ship, carrying these 5 Viking adventurers, arriving to shore against this necromancer and its undead skeletons. Now that we have our subjects, let's prime everything black. Then add some white ink for a zenithal highlight. Before we start adding paint, let's sketch out our plan. Starting with a rough top view, I draw the sidewalls around the perimeter and the basic shape of the shore. Then we place our ship here in the frigid waters. To add some lights, I plan a pocket in the foam for a battery box, and a spot on the sidewall for the switch. Next, I mark where each of the minis will be placed. Then I draw the light bulb locations and plan the wire routes through the foam to illuminate the ocean waters. I sketch out some ice in the water before thickening some lines for emphasis. What do you think about this drawing format? Would you like to see this done in the future, or maybe in a different style? I come up with a rock formation to cover the battery box, then write some material ideas on the sketch. I plan on using a wooden base for this project, some foam for the landmass, a resin poured ocean, and some broken resin ice. With ideas on paper, let's start with the base. I decided to repurpose this old bookshelf. I mark the outline and cut the board. Then I add these thin strips for sidewalls. With a rough idea in place, let's plan out the colors. Once our colors are selected, I use the airbrush to give the ship a base coat of brown and paint the sail with a khaki base and lighter beige highlights. Remember, if you want to purchase any of the items I use or talk about, check the link in the description for all the info on my crafting materials. Once the airbrush work is done, I head to the paint desk and start on the terrain. I use this extendable blade to cut the foam into the right size and shape. This is my first project using this instead of a standard box cutter, and I highly recommend the upgrade for anyone wanting to cut foam. I cut sections before laying them on the drawing to check the dimensions. Once the foam sections resemble the map, I use Mod Podge to connect the pieces together. Then I flip it over to plan out the wiring routes that will be cut into the underside. I use a Sharpie to mark the paths and a wood cutting tool to carve the grooves in the foam. With the grooves cut, I get to work on soldering the wires. I got to use a new tool, this pistol grip soldering gun, that surprised me with how well it worked. First creating clusters of wires, soldering all the positives into one cluster and all the negatives into another. Once they are finished, I test the connection. I glue the wires into place, sealing the grooves with packing tape afterward. With the wires installed into the foam, I cut a notch for the switch in the sidewalls. I should have just cut through the soft wood, but I drilled progressively larger holes trying not to split the wood. Well, I still split the wood.
But this leads me to my first big mistake,
which is the foam was upside down, leading me to cutting the notch in the wrong corner. So I removed the damaged section and cut a new piece to repair the wall.
Notch here, it's there.
Then cut the notch in the proper location before priming everything black. While the primer dries, I solder the wires to the battery box and switch, then tape the wires and check the connection again. Once finished, I glue the foam into place. I use super glue to lock the battery pack down and place the rock formation over it. I use a mixture of plaster, Mod Podge, water, and paint to coat and seal the foam. While that mix dries, I put a base layer of blue on the bottom of the water surface. Then I use a standard plaster mix to fill in any gaps or missed spots. When that dries, I add packing tape to seal the wiring holes. I use UV resin to seal the border of each piece of tape and cure it with a UV flashlight. I start painting the floor of the water area, blending from dark blue in the deepest areas to lighter blue at the shallow edges. Then I paint the slopes leading to the water with a pale blue. I also apply some paint layers to the rock that will cover the battery component, then touch up the black walls of the base. Next, let's paint the ship. I use a mixture of browns, focusing on lighter colors near the front, rear, and upward facing boards on the ship. I also paint different schemes on each of the decorative shields on either side. I use a gunmetal paint for the metal parts of the shields and the etchings on the side of the ship. I add a wash to darken the recesses and use silver to highlight the upward faces. To incorporate more environmental lighting, I paint blue bounce light on the water-facing edges of the wood. Sadly, most of these will be obscured in the end, but I think they look pretty cool. I continue to add details such as creating wood grain, applying dark washes on the metal, and other last details on the main part of the ship before moving to the sail. I start on the sail by painting the stripes with medium orange and the wood with dark brown. I paint in shadows of the colors where it curves inward and highlights on the areas facing the sky, trying to create a smooth transition from light to shadow. I use ivory paint to color the ropes of the sail, then finish by adding some highlights to the oars before calling the ship done. With all the parts finished, I glue the ship together. Then glue the ship into place on the water area and prepare the 2-part epoxy resin. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified of future content. I create the water resin with a small drop of blue ink before mixing it well. Then I pour the blue resin over the surface, being careful to watch for leaks. I use a heat gun to remove any residual air bubbles before calling it good for curing. I check the lights for the final time before moving the resin to cure. While the water resin cures, I add some more to my mix and add some white ink for the ice effect. I use a baking dish with some parchment paper to have a surface to pour the flat sheet of resin. When finished, I set this aside with the water resin to cure overnight, and this is what it looks like after curing. I quickly eyeballed the additional resin for the ice so it came out a little on the flexible side. This led to me cutting it with scissors instead of smashing it into bits. Once they're cut up into bits, I bring out the cured base and begin positioning the ice on the water. Once I have the ice looking how I want, I use Mod Podge to glue them all into place, while also making some water texture. Next, I create my snow using a snowflake mix, Mod Podge, and water. I apply this to the shore and rock. Followed by applying it to various spots on the ship using the putty knife, wet brush, and even my fingers. With the ship's details complete, it's time to work on the character painting. On the frozen shore stands a powerful necromancer commanding a group of undead skeletons. I paint these first, starting with the purple cloaked spellcaster. I start with his cloth, followed by his wooden staff and Defias bandit mask. Comment below if you get that nerdy reference. Then I finish with details such as the belt, chains, and black painted fingernails, because necromancers are very emo. After the necromancer was finished, I worked on the skeleton warriors, painting their bones, leathers, cloth, and armor. Some carried wooden shields that were especially fun to paint. After all the soldiers on land were painted, I moved to the Vikings aboard the ship, painting flesh tones, leather, cloth, fur, armor, and every other texture you can imagine. All of these characters were fun and had their own unique flavor. Here's what each group looked like after the painting was done. With everything now complete, we're finally ready for the big reveal. Until next time, see y'all later.